Today we're covering a bombshell document from the White House that just flipped the entire transatlantic relationship on its head. A former European Prime Minister calling American policy Kremlin rhetoric, a radical pivot that declares our longest allies might not even exist as we know them in 20 years, plus an aggressive new doctrine for the Western Hemisphere that sounds more like military occupation than partnership. And trust me, the most shocking part? I've saved that for the very end of this episode. I spent years inside one of the biggest, most respected media organizations you can name, watching editors bend stories to fit whatever narrative kept the sponsors happy and the powerful comfortable. I walked away from that world because I couldn't stomach another rewrite that buried the truth. Now I work alone, I answer to nobody, and I tell you exactly what's happening, no matter how uncomfortable it gets. If you value what we do here, if you appreciate someone willing to dig through 33-page policy documents at midnight so you don't have to, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and if you're able, consider becoming a sponsor of this channel. We're doing the hard, unglamorous work of fact-checking every claim, cross-referencing every source, making sure you're not getting fed misinformation dressed up as news. That takes time, it takes resources, and it takes your support. Stick with me until the end, because what I'm about to reveal gets more disturbing with every page. Late Thursday night, the Trump administration released its new national security strategy, and within hours, the political establishment across Europe went into absolute meltdown. 33 pages that were supposed to outline America's security priorities instead read like a divorce filing. This wasn't a policy document, this was an indictment. The White House didn't just criticize European allies, it declared them unreliable, demoralized, and headed toward what the text literally calls civilizational erasure. Let that phrase sink in for a moment. Civilizational erasure. The document, dated November 2025, argues that if current trends continue, Europe as we know it will be unrecognizable within 20 years, maybe sooner. Why? According to the strategy, it's a toxic combination of mass migration, collapsing birth rates, and something the authors describe as a loss of civilizational confidence. In other words, Europe is forgetting who it is, and it's being replaced by something else entirely. But here's where things get even more incendiary. The strategy doesn't frame this as a natural demographic shift or an unfortunate side effect of globalization. No, it accuses European governments of actively undermining their own democracies, pursuing what it calls unrealistic goals in supporting Ukraine, and failing spectacularly to defend their own territory and people. The document states, and I'm paraphrasing the essence here, that it's far from obvious whether European countries can remain reliable allies if several NATO members become majority non-European in population over the coming decades. Stop right there. That line sent shockwaves through Brussels, Berlin, Paris, every capital that thought the transatlantic alliance was rock solid. Because what the White House just said, in official government language, is that immigration is turning NATO allies into something America can't trust. Now, if you're wondering why this matters, just wait until you hear the reaction from European leaders themselves. Critics immediately pointed out that this language mirrors the so-called Great Replacement theory, a conspiracy framework claiming that migration represents a deliberate plot to replace native European populations with people from other regions. This theory has been officially recognized as promoting exclusionary and prejudiced views, and individuals who embraced it have cited it when carrying out violent acts across the West. The fact that the United States government is now using similar rhetoric in an official national security document is frankly unprecedented. And the White House didn't just make vague claims, they backed it up with numbers, whether you find those numbers convincing or not. The strategy cites research claiming that a single asylum seeker costs the Netherlands €475,000 over a lifetime. It says irregular migration cost France €1.8 billion in 2023 alone. It references studies from Denmark and Germany showing that individuals from non-Western countries commit disproportionately high rates of violent offenses. It also lists multiple coordinated attacks carried out by migrants across the continent in recent years. The document goes further, calling for an end to what it describes as mass migration, which, according to the authors, drains resources, escalates violence and other offenses, weakens social cohesion, distorts markets, and threatens national security in countries around the world. This isn't just a policy recommendation, this is an accusation. The White House is saying European elites have failed, that they've allowed their societies to degrade, that they've lost control, but what most people miss is just how personal this attack gets. There's an entire section titled Promoting European Greatness, which sounds positive until you read what's actually in it. The document describes the European Union's economic decline as worsened by changing ethnic composition, falling birth rates, loss of identity, and regulatory strangulation imposed by Brussels. The EU itself is labelled anti-democratic, its attempts to regulate member states described as threats to freedom and sovereignty. And then comes the kicker. The strategy openly expresses support for what it calls patriotic European parties, saying their rising influence gives cause for great optimism. Let me translate that for you. The White House is endorsing the far-right movements that mainstream European politics has spent years trying to marginalize. The very parties that Brussels, Berlin, and Paris call extremist are now getting a thumbs up from Washington. If you thought the transatlantic relationship was strained before, this is a full-blown rupture. Carl Bildt, Sweden's former prime minister, didn't hold back. He called the strategy to the right of the far right in Europe and described it as J.D. Vance on steroids. He pointed out that the only region where the document sees democracy under threat is Europe itself, and that the language used could only be found in what he termed the delirious ravings of the Kremlin. Other former officials echoed his concerns, comparing the tone to rhetoric typically associated with Vladimir Putin. Think about that for a second. A US national security strategy is being compared to Russian propaganda, not by fringe bloggers, but by respected former leaders. And here's where things get even more intriguing, because this isn't just about Europe. The strategy proposes a radical rethinking of American priorities worldwide. The United States, according to this document, intends to reduce its presence in regions deemed less critical to national security than before and refocus on the Western Hemisphere. Enter what the text calls the Trump addition to the Monroe Doctrine, a declaration that after years of neglect, America will reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore dominance in the region and protect the homeland. What does that actually mean? It means no more foreign military infrastructure in Latin America or the Caribbean. The document explicitly targets China and Russia, warning that their forces and facilities will not be tolerated in what Washington now considers its exclusive sphere of influence. This isn't Cold War posturing. This is a return to 19th century imperialism dressed up in 21st century security language. The concrete measures outlined include redeploying military resources to confront threats in the Western Hemisphere, expanding the presence of the Navy and Coast Guard to control sea lanes, combat irregular migration, and reduce human and narcotics smuggling. And here's the part that should alarm you. The document explicitly states that the United States will use naval and air power against vessels involved in narcotics smuggling, and that achieving these objectives requires a more appropriate presence of American ships and aircraft in the region. Translation: Washington is preparing to militarize its own backyard and is willing to use lethal force against threats it once considered law enforcement matters, not military ones. If you're a country in Latin America or the Caribbean, you just got put on notice that American warships and fighter jets are coming, whether you invited them or not. This is a dramatic departure from how previous administrations approached the world. For decades, Europe was seen as the key partner, the counterweight to Russia, the foundation of the liberal international order. Now the White House is openly stating that European governments are pursuing unrealistic goals in the conflict with Ukraine, that they're undermining democracy in their attempts to maintain support for Kyiv, and that they're incapable of defending themselves or staying true to their own values. Russia, interestingly, barely appears in the document as an adversary. Instead, Europe is painted as a continent in decline, unable to protect itself, unable to remain loyal to its principles, and rapidly losing the characteristics that once made it a reliable ally. For European capitals, the message is crystal clear. The era of unconditional American support is over. If you want to keep Washington on your side, you'll need to radically overhaul your policies, starting with migration and ending with how you think about your own identity. The document was released without a named author, but it carries a foreword from Trump himself, who called it a roadmap for keeping America the greatest and most successful nation in human history. This isn't just strategy. This is a manifesto of neo-isolationism. The United States is stepping back from its role as global security guarantor and focusing inward on its own hemisphere, leaving allies to fend for themselves. For Europe, this marks the beginning of a new era where they cannot count on Washington, where the American president openly declares that the continent is headed for civilizational erasure. The question now isn't whether European leaders agree with that diagnosis. It's how they'll respond to a world where their most important ally considers them part of the problem, not part of the solution. So, let's bring this all together. We've just witnessed the publication of an American national security document that treats longtime allies as liabilities, embraces rhetoric previously associated with fringe conspiracy theories, endorses far-right political movements in Europe, and announces a militarized return to 19th century sphere of influence thinking in the Americas. Former prime ministers are calling it Kremlin propaganda. Policy experts are stunned, and all of this happened late on a Thursday night with minimal advance warning. If you found this breakdown valuable, if it helped you understand what's really happening behind the headlines, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and if you can, please consider sponsoring our work. Independent journalism isn't cheap, and it's only possible because people like you believe it matters. We're out here doing the hard work of reading the documents nobody else wants to touch, connecting the dots nobody else is willing to see, and bringing you the truth without the corporate filter. Your support keeps this going. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If what you just heard made you stop and think, if it gave you information you weren't getting anywhere else, then I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. But more than that, if you're in a position to help, please consider becoming a sponsor. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. What we do here isn't easy. Every single script you see, every fact I share, every claim I make, I'm spending hours cross-referencing sources, verifying data, making sure I'm not feeding you misinformation disguised as journalism. In a world drowning in fake news, where algorithms push whatever gets clicks and major outlets bend stories to fit their agenda, somebody has to do the unglamorous work of actually checking if things are true. That somebody is me, and I can only keep doing it with your support. This isn't a corporate-backed operation with endless budgets. It's me, my research, and viewers like you who believe independent journalism matters. Every sponsorship, no matter how small, keeps this channel alive and keeps the truth flowing. So if you value what we're building here, if you want media that answers to you instead of advertisers, please consider chipping in. Thank you for being here.